Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dandies, a podcast where each episode two friends share a recommendation with one another. We talk about what we liked, what we would change, and try not to judge each other too much over our bad tastes. This week, we're going to die. A lot.
All right, here's the thing, Jordan. I have a lot of plans for this podcast. Like, we are going to take over the world with this thing, but it's small iterations. We have to, build it up bit by bit, block by block. And I think the very next thing that we need to incorporate into this podcast is a morning zoo radio soundboard. I don't have one, but I guess I'm just going to have to pretend that we have one with my mouth sounds. I hope that you enjoy this addition to our podcast.
What's a zoo radio?
That's what she said. See, I really think this is what we need to take it to the next level.
It's the missing sauce.
Exactly. Like, okay, think about all the successful people in radio and podcasting. We have Howard Stern, Larry King, Ryan Seacrest. Like, they all have, these hilarious...
Joe Rogan.
Don Imus.
Does Kevin Spacey have a podcast?
He shouldn't. Like, someone ought to stop that. Be like, Kevin Spacey, no, you don't get to have a podcast.
You don't get to do anything.
Okay, look, we it's the year of our Lord 2020, and any old Yahoo can start a podcast. Exhibit A.
Us.
How are we going to set ourselves apart from all the other Yahoos? And I really think that it's making really crude sound clips to break up the thoughtful critiques of media with fart sounds and sirens.
Look, I hear what you're saying, but I think the alternative is that we just talk about manga.
I think that's a great idea.
And the reason I suggest that is at the end of the day, okay, so this is something I've thought about. That I'm going to say this, and whenever we eventually make it big, people are going to listen back to this episode, call us idiots, and then list all the other manga podcasts there are. This has got to be the first manga podcast episode ever posted to the internet, right?
I think that we are breaking new ground with this. Like, no one has ever talked about manga on a podcast. Like, someone's got to start. It ought to be us, right?
No one likes manga. This is the first. We're getting the movement started.
All right, well, I'm ready to talk about some manga. I have my half-eaten peanut butter sandwich that I'm going to try not to chew into the microphone. I got my required 1,024 beverages. I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Well, on that note, I rolled out of bed and hastily got all my snacks together, so I think I qualify as ready. But anyways, this week, as I exhorted Will last episode, we're going to be talking about the popular Japanese manga / light novel, All You Need Is Kill.
All you need is kill.
Okay, before we even get into any of the facts about this thing, is this a play on All You Need Is Love by the Beatles?
That's a really interesting question. I kind of doubt it because there's nothing else. Like, if you were going to make a reference like that, you'd put something like that inside the story. And maybe, as you're about to talk about, we read the manga. It's based on a book. Maybe the book has a reference, but there's no reference inside what we read. So, who knows? But I think that we can agree this title kind of sucks, right?
Yeah, I'm not okay. So I didn't really get it. The obvious thing is there's a lot. Okay, I would think that it would be something like All You Need Is Death, because they kill a lot, but the story is about the characters dying repeatedly.
Yeah, it's really, really weird. I don't know what they were thinking about that, but why don't you go ahead and tell us more about the story?
It's based on a light novel written by Hiroshi Sakura. Okay, so I'm gonna just say this real quick. I'm gonna butcher these names. We're stupid Americans, and we don't know how to pronounce things the way they're meant to be spelled or said from other cultures. But I'm gonna give it my best shot. Based on a light novel written by Hiroshi Sakurazaka, this manga was written by Ryosuke Takeuchi and illustrated by Takashi Obata.
And before we get any further, this is one of our episodes where us to have this discussion about this piece of media, we really need to dive deep into all of the story spoilers, and it's not that long. It's a pretty self-contained, compact story. So for anyone that's interested in reading this manga, just want to go ahead and let you know we're going to be spoiling everything from the get-go. So just keep that in mind. Full spoiler warning ahead.
Yeah, the entire story can be knocked out in an afternoon or two. Like I recommend reading it before listening to the episode as well. But just as some background on both the novel and the manga, just real quick, both are extremely popular, and stated before in the last episode, it influenced the movie, also confusingly named Edge of Tomorrow. It had several name changes, like with the Blu-ray/DVD release being called Live, Die, Repeat. It seems like,
which is the best of all the titles, I think.
Yeah, that one's actually really fun. Though I'll say that it's gonna be really hard for me not to compare this to the movie, especially after having watched the movie. I feel like what this manga does versus what the movie does, and I know you may not have seen it, Will. So, like I said, I won't expect you to be able to reference it or anything like that. But I will say I think the movie has a little bit more fun.
Okay. I have not seen the movie, so I have nothing to compare this to. But I was interested in kind of hearing a little bit more about how these two differ.
Yeah, and I'll give a few comparisons, and obviously we're not. The episode is not to compare those two things, though. It is it might be an interesting point later on in the future if it finds its place somewhere. Maybe I exhort you with the movie later on.
I'd be up for that.
This is Groundhog Day, but aliens and lots of dying.
More gruesome.
Yes. So it starts with our main character, Keiji Korea, basically finding out during a battle with the alien species known as mimics that every time he dies in this specific battle, that he basically relives the previous 30 hours. He starts back the day before the battle and gets to redo the events over and over again. And he, is successively getting better with each life. He's kind of leveling himself up and trying to become a better soldier so that he can make it further into the battle, hopefully stop the alien threat. That whole thing.
Yeah, he becomes black-pilled very quickly. I think it's only the third or fourth time when he has a very massive shift in his outlook on things, and really becomes super black-pilled by it.
Yes, and I guess from here, before we dig into actually go into the deep bits, Will, what did you think about this?
Yeah, so overall, I liked it. It was a fun reading experience. There are some mangas where I kind of mentally check out halfway through, and this was definitely not one of them. It did kind of grip me and made me want to finish the story. I love the style of it. I have some gripes about the story, but overall, I liked it.
Yeah, same. I'm going to go ahead and give my take here as well, because this was the first time for both of us. I got this at a Barnes & Noble a couple of years ago just because I had heard a lot about it, and it, entered my reading list from there. And it's sat on my shelf since, not due to lack of interest, just due to other hobbies kind of taking over. And, I enjoyed it for the most part, but it made me want to read the light novel, maybe, just because I think it does a lot of really damn good things in the manga, but then there's some stuff happening that I think that does not work as much for me.
It definitely feels like we're only getting half the story, or that there are things going on that we should be clued in about. And I did find myself a couple of times in the story wondering, I wonder how this plays out in the novel. So yeah, it's definitely some stuff like that.
Okay, well, just to go ahead and drop this bomb on you before we even talk about the ending. The ending of this manga is the same as the ending of the book.
I figured as much.
Okay, all right, real quick, let's go over really the two characters that are featured in this story. If you agree that there are basically two main characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the characters were not really that important, but there are two main characters here. As you mentioned, the first one is Keiji Korea. He is I don't know if he's conscripted or not, but he is a soldier, that is currently stationed in Japan. He, seems to be Japanese, and he fights for what is called the United Defense Force, I believe.
Their jacket unit.
The jacket unit, yeah. So basically a confederation of armies from around the world that have come together to fight the mimics. mimics. And we'll talk more about what the mimics are later. And he just, kind of standard soldier, kind of, that just like a normal private, doesn't have really any experience to speak of. He's unfamiliar and doesn't have any experience with the equipment that he's using, either the weapons or the jackets, which are kind of like power suits. We'll talk about more of those more later. And just kind of just a normal soldier. And once he finds himself, stuck in this battle loop where he keeps dying and then wakes up, as I mentioned before, he gets very dark, kind of like I have to do everything I can. And he goes to some pretty great length to get better over each iteration and, becoming more powerful with both the jacket, battle armor, and the weapon. And the story is really him kind of trying to get better and better as he, goes through these loops.
Yeah, and he's getting better. I mean, because he basically starts off the story as straight up fodder. They sent him and his unit out there to die because it makes it very clear, we hardly know how to use these jacket mech units or whatever they're called, or whatever they are. And he becomes this super, you mentioned that he gets better, definitely not mentally. Even though he's getting much better, in terms of combat and is kind of coming to grips with his repeated deaths and stuff, the dude's messed up. By the end of that book, right?
Oh, yeah. No, he is absolutely 100% a different person, just completely from the beginning and the end of the book. That this experience really changes who he is at an individual level. And we can kind of see this as he's contrasted against our second main character, who we do see at the very beginning, but we learn more about her as the story progresses. And this is Rita Vrataski. And she is a American who has become, was referred to, they call her the Valkyrie of the battlefield. She has become quite adept at winning battles against the mimics. And her and her platoon are transferred to Japan to help out with an upcoming battle. And during the very first time Keiji dies in battle, she's with him. And, she starts talking about Japanese green tea, something that just has nothing to do with the fact that he just got killed on a battlefield. She's kind of a presence as Keiji continues to improve himself throughout these battles. Once he becomes good enough to kind of hold his own on the battlefield, he is noticed by Rita, and she realizes that he's looping because she has looped before.
He was successfully noticed by Senpai.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely something that was for his own good, I believe.
I think they made a decision with the manga that I would be interested to see if it's the same in the book, to juxtapose it against the movie that was based on all of this. Rita's kind of invents kind of late into this, wouldn't you say? Maybe could have used a few earlier chapters being a featured character.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, she is introduced, but you don't learn anything about her pretty much up until the point where she's like, "Hey, you're looping. I know about this." And then after that revelation is made, which I believe is exactly halfway through the book, then we start learning more about her. But she's introduced and you know about her, but you kind of forget about her for the second quarter of the story.
I think that it was interesting that they waited as long to introduce her, because in the movie she's introduced, I would say, within the first 20 minutes as someone else who is in the loop and is pretty much sharing the journey with Tom Cruise's character, who is they wiped that character up pretty good, just to say. But anyways,
we actually, when we first see her, we see that she doesn't fight with a normal set of equipment. Her jacket, the battle armor, is painted bright red, and that's definitely in contrast to all of the others. Makes her stand out on the battlefield. And we see her fighting not with the normal guns or ammunition. She fights with a really wicked looking battle axe that she is very adept at using and kills lots of mimics with.
Yeah, it's bigger than her, and they make a point in the story that you have to fight with it a certain way, otherwise it'll just straight up break your spine.
Yeah, it's revealed that she has to fight with this battle axe because the normal guns, ammunition that they use against the mimics have limitations. And if you're trying to make yourself better and better at killing these mimics over, loop after loop after loop, that you need a weapon that doesn't have that limitation. So the battle axe was made for her. And then Keiji, when he progresses in the loops, discovers this and finds a way to have one made for him as well.
Right. And it's really shitty of their military to put them out there against this like seemingly endless horde of mimics with only enough ammunition between each of them to kill 20.
Especially since, the mimic invasion, if that's what you want to call it, is not like a moral, like the war is not in a moral gray area. This is like a very like bad invasion that's coming and killing. You think that they would, try as hard as they could to, survive and like do it the right way. And for them to kind of be treated that way kind of seems at odds with the foe that they're fighting.
Oh, then they make a point that they don't know much about the mimics, and like even the mimics don't seem to have any thoughts or like emotions or anything like that. They could just be like an earlier part of a greater invasion or something that like that these seem like more drone like, and they definitely act that way. We don't ever hear one speak or even make any noises. They're just kind of like these hovering balls with like gaping mouths, and they're very just hellish looking. They are not your traditional alien invader.
They look like the annoying orange. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that or Goatsy, right?
Yeah, well, let's just get into it. So the enemies that our characters are fighting, and like humanity as a whole, are fighting these mimics, and it really isn't explained what these things are, if they're like terrestrial in origin or they're aliens. I think they kind of hint very slightly that's an alien invasion, but it's never explained. And not a lot about the mimics other than the way that they're using the loops is explained. And part of me likes that because it kind of creates like a suspense. You really feel like they're an unknowable enemy because we don't learn too much about them other than how they affect the loops. But also part of it makes me think, man, I really wish I knew where these mimics were coming from, why they're there, why they see humanity as such a threat. So yeah, there's a duality there that I think is interesting.
Obviously, like most choices to make things ambiguous, I think that this is a very intentional thing because, like we'll get into in our theme section, I think the mimics are representative of a element of war as opposed to like a real entity. Like I think in the story they serve their purpose as this kind of terrifying thing that you're like that kind of feels hopeless to fight against. And I think that the kind of like snobby, like highbrow way to look at them is just kind of like the cruelty or maybe like unforgiving nature of war is where it seems the story kind of puts them.
Sure.
Like the faceless, emotionless foe that you see on the battlefield and the emotions we derive from that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to put it. I think I referenced this just a bit ago, but if humanity were to fight a war, fighting like a humanity versus something else is kind of the most moral war you can have. Because you're not killing, your fellow man. If like these mimics are like actively trying to kill humans, then it's it's a just war. We don't really have that in the real world. All wars are against other people, and that has a whole lot of ethical and moral considerations to take into account. I think that these mimics just being a alien invasion or whatever you want to call them, it actually takes away a bit of that moral and ethical quandary you find in war. So like any point that this story tries to make about war, I actually think is kind of tampered down a little bit by the fact that these mimics are just a present threat to the entirety of humanity.
Yeah, which makes me think that there's maybe I agree with you too on that point. Like I think that like not giving them a voice or anything like that, maybe we're just too smooth brained to catch like some like larger theme or like representation that they're supposed to have. But it definitely seems like the choice to have them be like kind of mindless is a choice.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Yeah, but aside from the point I made a second ago about them supposed to be like representing the really bad sides of war, like the war as an entity, I think a lot is lost by not having in a story that is very clearly about like post-traumatic stress, this is it could have gained a lot more from these things having more going on for them.
We do see that the mimics are an army and they act as though they are one. We don't know what their structure is, but we know that they have certain entities that are more important than others, and they that we refer to them as servers that serve as some sort of like neural link between all the mimics. And the end of the story has to do with like finding these servers and taking them down specifically to stop the loop that our characters are in. And it's discovered that the mimics know that the loop is happening, and they are responding to the loop in the same way that our characters are responding to the loop and using the loop to get stronger. The mimics are using that as battle data, and then in response to that, like shoring up defenses of their servers. So like they're definitely like an entity that can think and is smart and is using the loops to their own advantage.
Yeah, which again, interesting point not to see a little bit more of them, because it's just like, what is there other than wiping out humanity? There has to be some kind of goal at hand or something like that I would have liked to have seen more of.
There are other characters, but like most of them don't really factor all that much into the story. Like the lady that works in the cafeteria just like had no reason to be in the story. The engineer was an interesting character to see here and there, and she plays an important part, but like her character doesn't really do anything in the story other than just make the stuff that our two main characters use. So in terms of characters, it really is just these three, I'd say.
Definitely like the two characters you mentioned, and then of course like the bunkmate of KG's bunkmate and his sergeant. Like they're all very much just interaction points for KG and Rita. That none of the other side characters have arcs. They are just subject to what is happening with KG and Rita.
Yeah, and they're and especially for the soldiers, their deaths can serve as ways to show that loops can be different from iteration to iteration.
Right. Okay. So I guess kind of like wheeling things back around to the beginning, the story kicks off with KG, like we mentioned before, very like green, new like soldier, has not fought any of these mimics before, and really like it's kind of implied that humanity as a whole just has not had much success fighting these mimics. Like Rita Vertasky in general, who we see not too much further into the story, is really the only person. Her and her team are really the only people that have had much success fighting mimics, and this has been a losing battle for humanity. More or less, KG's going out for his first battle, and the story opens with him just dying with Rita speaking to him, and his loop has begun. It's revealed that before his first death, he killed a mimic that sends out a signal to another mimic on the battlefield, which allows all of the mimics on the battlefield to loop infinitely until they win the battle.
Yes, and as we mentioned, they are aware of the loop and they use it to their advantage.
Yes, and so when in this, basically, whenever you kill one of the server units, if you're the first person to have killed them, you get brought into that loop with them because of how the signal bounces off of your brain. The science isn't the important factor here. I don't think. I think it could be very easily picked apart, and it's a little like convoluted. The more you like think about it, it's very much the situation and the implications that are the focus.
Oh yeah, do not think about the logic of how any of this works. One of my major gripes with this story as a whole is that it really suffers from fridge logic. If you spend more than 5 minutes or 5 seconds thinking about how all this works or like different choices that people could make, I really do think the story falls apart. So don't think too much about how all the science works. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, this story is about the emotions, which I think is like something that they very much like you mentioned earlier, like they jump into very quickly, especially with KG. He goes from green, terrified by the situation, to kind of battle hardened within like a couple of like lives. At first I thought the change was kind of abrupt, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, I think I'd be pretty messed up by the trauma of my own death too.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's a really swift change, because it happens over the course of like his first few deaths. But he like the more I thought about it, the ways in which they are dying in this story is absolutely brutal.
Yeah, very gory, very brutal manga. You see like every single scene of him dying. It's all there and it's bloody glory.
As it carries on, and I'm not going to go into every little detail. Basically, KG becomes a much better fighter. He learns how to fight the mimics like dominantly. Like as he makes it further into these loops, he's dying more because he doesn't know what to do with himself going forward, as opposed to him being inexperienced. Basically, he's like, "How do I win this?" Is what the loops become about.
I gotta jump in here because I think this is two main parts where the story really falls apart, and I just want to kind of highlight those. One, I don't understand why he's all of a sudden coming to the realization that the way to break the loop is to win the battle. Like my first thought was, why are you assuming that? Like you have no idea why this is happening or like what the trigger would be to break out if you could. I think it was kind of short sighted on his part to think that that's what he had to do to win. And another thing is like, why did he not tell anybody? I really think this story goes in another crazy direction immediately as soon as he's like, hey, maybe I should like tell my superiors that this looping is happening.
Well, especially since it's made, the point is made later in the story that Rita's superiors did find out about what was happening to her. She told them and they made a special unit around them. And they utilized her to take advantage of that.
Why don't all the soldiers know that? Like, why is that guarded information? Like, especially since it's against a threat to humanity. It's not like you're fighting another nation. Like, why is this information not being disseminated?
Yeah, it's a very interesting like omission, and I think honestly part of it is just because they were really focused on I think the themes, like the thematic element of the story, rather than the story itself. Because I think by the end of the story, it becomes a piece more about like humanity and like what, especially like in times of war and trauma, like what allows us to kind of keep hold of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So just don't think, like we said, just don't think about it.
Yeah. And as it comes to a close, it resolves in a very like bitter sweet moment because he does ultimately win the battle. It does come at the cost of like Rita.
Sure. Yeah. Well, real quick, I just want to mention, the entire first half of the story is Keiji like becoming better, doing everything he needs to do to become better, and then at the midpoint is when we find out that Rita knows about the loops and realizes that Keiji is doing that. After that, it loops into her backstory, which is not particularly interesting. Like the style of how it's presented is interesting, but like ultimately, like her backstory is kind of just, I was a kid and then my family died and I joined the army and I took a new alias. Although one cool thing about that is a lot of this is a very like high tech environment. We see these crazy like jacket battle suits that they're wearing, which are really cool. And it's all very high tech. And it's a stark contrast to her backstory where we see these, horrifying, annoying orange mimics just get smacked by a 2010 Ford Ranger pickup truck.
Yes. So I did like the actual like individual moments from Rita's backstory, mainly just the attack on her farm. It was very terrifying because I don't know about you, but like I like not even like a quarter of the way into the story, I was like, how the hell did humanity not just completely fold to this? Because from what we can see, like the main weaponry used by the soldiers in the story don't even hurt them. Guns don't hurt them.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how resilient they are to normal artillery.
Yeah, it was basically like I think that was one of the most unrealistic things that I think was a bit like it was a bit too much for me to wrap my head around. Even it was a too big a ask to suspend the belief that we were able to like successfully fight them off in any capacity. Rita would literally need to be on every battlefield to like keep the world from crumbling, because that's the way this plays out. They straight up make it like it's just Rita. Rita's the only one who can beat them, and and we see that whenever like in Keiji's first battle where he just gets absolutely wiped out by these things.
If the mimics know about like looping and they're capable of like doing that, why aren't they using it over and over? If Rita did the same thing as Keiji did, where it's like, oh, I'm looping, I'm going to become stronger and win this battle. Why are we not seeing people in every single battle that the mimics do? Maybe it's only something they do when like things are actually kind of bad for them. Again, don't think about it.
I'm glad we're pointing out that it has that big issue, because I think that's what the first thing everyone's going to run into when they read this. So just to kind of get into what like the themes a little bit, because I think this is where it is successful.
Yeah, let's get into the themes.
Okay, so this entire story, and correct me or if you think, or let me know if you disagree. This is all about PTSD.
Yeah, I can agree. I can agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they introduce death as something that our main characters become intimately familiar with. Like we say, they die repeatedly and often in gruesome ways. But they are also watching the people around them get just horrifically slaughtered again and again. They have to repeatedly live with the same mistakes, or I guess different mistakes, regardless of their attempts to have a better outcome for the battle, repeatedly. And they KG very quickly, his emotional state is just like destroyed by the end of the story, and he's only really saved by his kindred spirit and Rita. Whenever she comes into play and finds out about his looping, and that she's not going to be the one that's looping for this battle, she's kind of relieved, but also like the two bond over this.
That's one of the best moments of this manga is when Rita and Keiji have that discussion, during physical training, where they kind of realize, and Rita hears Keiji, talk about her thing of talking to people who are dying about something that like has nothing to do with dying, that he is looping, and she starts tearing up. That's one of the the best emotional moments of this manga. You mentioned it a bit ago, but like dying over and over again must be traumatic. I mean, we have tons and tons of evidence that people just like being in accidents where they just like get hurt but still living causes like lifelong emotional and physical trauma. So I imagine that would be exponential if you're actually physically like being like maimed and killed over and over again. It's not surprising that Keiji and Rita, to an extent, are just so like traumatized and broken by these loops.
Yeah, even though they become these like just undefeatable badasses by the end of the story, like the story even ends like I think with them saying like KG is just kind of unkillable at this point. He's just he has the mimics memorized, and like he's just not really losing to them anymore. Like it establishes that he's supposed to be the savior for humanity in this war, but even so, it's taken such a like horrible cost on him to get to this point. Like he is just not only like losing like Rita, but like kind of losing. I mean, like his reality has kind of been warped by the number of times that he's died.
Yeah, this is highlighted by the flashback to Rita and her first looping experience. She finally became strong enough to break the loop, but then she realizes that somebody who through all the other loops never died. The one guy whose name I don't have written in front of me, but he had the newborn that he never met. And the one time that she was able to break the loop, he died when he didn't die in any other loop, and that weight is put on her. So that kind of highlights that trauma aspect as well.
The gore and violence in this story, I do believe that it is being utilized in a way to communicate. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a quick hit later on, but I do think it's kind of important to the themes here, and that's why I'm bringing it up here. But what are your thoughts on the violence being used and how it's being used here? Because for me, I was very mixed on it. I want to hear what you think.
Huh, yeah, that's interesting. And you get the violence from page one. Like, maybe not the first page, but the second page, you get a very bloody and gory color page of Keiji just like eviscerated by one of these mimics, while Rita stays with him while he dies and asks him about green tea being served in with meals in Japan for some reason. I stylistically, all of that violence is portrayed very well. Like, the artist definitely knows exactly what they're doing. As far as thoughts on why it's being presented that way, I think it just kind of goes into that whole, PTSD trauma thing. For us to really believe that this is a story about how these people cope with such just incredible trauma, we need to see that trauma happening. And what's the best way than just seeing somebody impaled on spikes, mimic spikes, or just shot in the face over and over again? The violence really needs to be presented this way for us to really understand the gravity of the emotional toll that's happening on these characters. And I will say, since these mimics look like the annoying orange, like we have to see how dangerous they are for us to take them seriously, because they do look a little silly at the beginning.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all your points. I do think that it was necessary, and I think that's why I'm mixed on it. I do think that they could not have communicated their theme successfully without all of the violence being present, mostly just because like death isn't something that we're worried about the characters, because they're constantly coming back. It does attach a cost to their fight when death isn't that end state. If they were just dying and coming back and just like unfazed by that, there would be no stakes.
Oh yeah, that's a great point, because it would just be like a video game. It'd just be like, your character model falls and you flash and then it disappears. Yeah, like you have to see that violence for it to for the impact to be made.
Yeah. Okay. And so the other half of that coin is, I do think that I am not wired to, and maybe this is probably more a problem with me and how I enjoy, I guess, my art. But I am not one for gore on this level. It's very hard for me to look at the imagery. I found myself on one page where like Keiji's body was like mostly like melted, and he was like almost in two, and I just couldn't quite look at that. It was just a bit too much for me to like take in. It was just there were also other spots of him just being impaled in several different directions, and like it was just obviously it's not supposed to be pretty, and it's meant to elicit that reaction, but it is much harder for me to connect with basically any medium when that sort of thing happens, and I guess that's the thing about art and subjectivity. It's not for everyone, but those were parts of the story that I had a hard time with myself.
That's very interesting that you say that. I'm actually someone who really has a hard time with violence in like TV and movies, like horror movies, like Saw and killing stuff. I cannot deal with that at all. But it's weird for me, because in video games and manga and other things, it's like easier for me to handle. So I cannot watch scary movies, but like I love like the Resident Evil games and other stuff like that. So like the violence in this manga, it didn't really bother me at all. I just thought it was very stylistically cool. That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. So, like, and just to be clear, like I watch a lot of things that have gore and stuff in them. It's just never been something that I like. I like it if it can be just avoided. You know what I mean? I prefer it if it can. But I do recognize when there are certain stories or video games that use it to communicate their message or theme, or maybe you're just trying to have fun with it. That I think it's contextual.
Like in The Lighthouse, where there's a little bit of that. I found that really hard. Like I was squirming in my seat, but I could play Resident Evil 2 all day.
I guess from there, I guess this is a good point to talk about the art and I mean like overall scene composition.
Oh yeah,
I think this goes without saying, but the art's like fire in this thing, right?
it's very well done. Yeah, Obata Sensei, did a great job, especially doing the emotional tender, like the emotional tender moments, like Rita crying, like showing the absolute like black pill despair that Keiji has, throughout the manga, and then just like the brutality of the violence. Yeah, the art is really great.
Yeah, so I think the art's incredible, and the reason why I wanted to specifically talk about the composition, like scene to scene composition, as amazing as the art is, the action is incredibly hard to track. Did you have that same issue?
I have this issue with a lot of battle manga. When I read long stories, I do tend to kind of check out halfway through. I'm reading Chainsaw Man right now, which is really awesome, a really cool story, but it's a battle manga. There are like some chapters where it's all just very high energy action fighting and not a lot of dialogue, and I always find myself kind of skimming over that parts, because I guess I just find the interpersonal dialogue the most engaging part of that stuff. So yeah, there were definitely parts, probably less than some other manga that I've read, but there were definitely parts of this where I was just kind of like skimming the battle scenes, trying to get to the next story point.
Okay, that makes sense. If this is something that's normal, I think it's a little bit more forgivable. I still think it's an issue because there was a couple of like battle scenes where it seemed like they were trying to communicate like a fluid maneuver that one of the characters was doing, but it did not come off as fluid at all. It was like I was like I don't understand how they got and ended where they did or what exactly happened in the scene.
Yeah, it's very busy and hard to follow.
Yeah, but I mean, I found that very forgivable because everything just looks really damn cool. I think the mimics look terrifying and sweet and effective in that way. But although you saying they look like the annoying orange just made me feel a little bit differently about that, maybe.
I really want to hammer home the look of these mimics for sure. I will say that one thing that I think that makes this harder in this one than some other manga is that it's all new stuff. The battle jackets, which are really cool looking, I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a second, kind of do make the humans look almost like alien themselves in a way. And I wonder if that's intentional. And they're fighting these mimics who are very much not human. They're not using like guns that we recognize. And all of that together makes it to where it makes another level of difficulty in understanding what's happening in these battle scenes, because not only do we have to interpret like, okay, here's one figure, here's another figure, he's doing this to this other thing right now, but we also have to be like, okay, that's a person in a battle jacket. So there's like another layer of having to try to understand what's going on.
You mentioned the jackets. I got to go off for a second. I love my Metal Gear and I love Gundam, but like this is I love the jackets in this story. They're very sweet looking.
Yeah, they're very good, and I was very struck by the fact that they're very humanoid. They have things on the front that look like eyes. So you can tell it's like a human inside the suit, but like the outside appearance doesn't really scream human.
Yeah, it's like very like I don't know if you ever saw District 9.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, the aliens in District 9, it looks like their suits look like the aliens from District 9 mixed with like a fighter pilot almost.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, very much into the art. I think that's like a big like win here. The relationship between Rita and KG in the art are things that I walked away from the story like really enjoying. And I guess that's kind of like ultimately where I feel a little disappointed by Rita's like kind of late in the story appearance, because I think like KG tells Rita towards the end of the story that he loves her, and
I did think that was a little out of left field, to be honest.
Yeah, and she didn't return it either. It may have been for her as well. It just seemed, and maybe it's because he experienced her so many more times than any of us really experienced her, but like it just didn't feel earned at that moment. Like you could tell that they had a bond and that they had a shared connection, which was very believable. But for him to jump past the point of like it being platonic and into like I love you, it was just a little. I didn't feel like it had been earned yet at that point.
I do think that there is a basis for this in the real world. I mean, we know about trauma bonding. That absolutely is a thing that happens in the real world, and it does not make any sense. And that definitely ties into the theme of just like trauma. In the story, is that this might very well be just like trauma bonding. Like he's experienced her so many times. For her, it's always been the same day, but just immediately knowing that he went through the same hell that she did, back during when she was looping, I did, she starts crying immediately after like realizing, yes, this man's looping just like I did. I definitely think there's some sort of like irrational bonding going on, but it is kind of out of left field if you're not expecting it.
Okay, so that actually made me appreciate that note a lot more, and I'm glad you brought that up. That is a great way to think about that, because just to clarify, Will and I are not combat veterans. We have not experienced any sort of like war related trauma. We're both.
I would like to point out that I am a very long veteran of the posting wars.
Okay, so okay,
it's true. It's true.
Okay, so Will and I are very smooth-brained white boys who have not, experienced too much, like battlefield experience. We haven't been on the battlefield too much ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I've never been in a fight. So.
Yeah, and we've been. I would say I can't speak for you, Will, but for myself, like luckily I've been in enough situations where I haven't been, I haven't experienced like hardcore trauma in these ways.
That's true. Yes.
So it is very like insightful to like gain that like that perspective that like that love through like trauma bonding thing. That is very interesting to me and something I would like to see more of. And I'm glad it seems to be more serviced by the plot than I gave it credit for.
I imagine that watching that annoying orange show that they produced like 10 years ago was probably a traumatic experience for everyone that saw it.
You're on fire today. Oh my God.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up this story. Very very interesting, very emotional, very action packed. Like I said, I liked it. As long as you don't think too much about the details of the story, this is a very enjoyable read.
Well, you want to get into some quick hits then?
Oh yeah, hit me, Day.
All right, we gotta stop spewing our quick hits. I think this is the third episode straight where we like blew our load on one of our quick hits.
I think that speaks to the quality of the discussion that we're having. But I hear you. Maybe we'll workshop a better way to do this. But hit me.
All right. So, would you ever want a sequel to All You Need Is Kill?
I actually really like that this is a very contained story. I actually didn't hate the ending at all. I think having that kind of open ended, he does what he does, and is just like, okay, I am now the super soldier. I am going to take the mimics head on. I actually really like that, and I like how just contained the story was. Kind of like we talked about with Dead Space. I think Dead Space as like a whole intact thing would be much better if it was just Dead Space 1 and they never tried to do sequels and do that story. So if they had a sequel, I'd probably check it out, but I think this is totally fine as just a standalone thing.
This story was not about the war with the mimics. It was about the relationship between these two people and the trauma shared between the two.
That's true. If they had a sequel, it would definitely have to be something different.
Yeah, and I think that's why it ends the way it does. It pretty much spells out at the end, hey, KG is going to end this war. He's the super soldier. He can't be beaten. So you can kind of infer what's going to happen after this scene, like where he goes up and has the cup of coffee in her apartment above the military base. Like he kind of enjoys the coffee that she poured for both of them that morning, and he remembers her and resolves that he's going to remember her on the battlefield as well, and paint his jacket sky blue, like her favorite color.
Yeah, that's the story. And a sequel would just not have that.
Right, and that's the thing. I think that they told the story they wanted to tell between these two characters and all that stuff like that. So I don't think I would want a sequel. If they did have a sequel, I'm maybe I come across it at some point, but I think I got what they were trying to put down with this one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you: does the presence of the kind of bit characters, or as we call them, waifus, that really don't contribute much to the story and are just kind of meant there to be kind of like hints of fan service? Do you think that the presence of those characters are dissident to the rest of the story presented here?
Absolutely. This manga is extremely grounded despite some of the art direction kind of speaking otherwise. Obviously these mimics are otherworldly and they're running around in these mecha suits. For the most part, everything is pretty down to earth in terms of character design and modeling and stuff. And Rita, despite being kind of fitting a sort of stereotype as far as how anime women are drawn, is also fairly down to earth. She's not disproportionately drawn or anything like that. She's a smaller woman, with features not really that are outstanding, whereas the lunch lady who shows up in the book is just massive chested and drawn very much like she fell out of some kind of slice of life anime. It's hard to explain, but it's very much it's the most anime character in the book.
Yeah, that character was really, and that whole scene with her was really weird. It was hey, you just fought, or you just got beat in a fight against this very unfortunate United States racial stereotype. Hey, do you want to have sex? Yeah. It was really weird.
And I think that scene would have been a lot more I think it would have hit more. It would have been a lot more. I would have felt more had she not been drawn the way that she was. If she was more I guess like down to earth in terms of design, like the rest of the characters had been, I think that scene would have hit different. But it was like he was being hit on by a body pillow.
Yeah, it was really weird, and that definitely I see that's another part where I wonder, does the book have more about this? Does she play a more important part there? But as of right now, she definitely could have just been cut out of the manga. The engineer, who is also a little bit that way, not really fan servicey, but definitely like supposed to be like a girl that you kind of latch on to.
She's almost drawn differently.
Almost like she's from a slice of life manga or something like that. She much more justified her existence inside the story, even though her like characterization was a little out of touch with the grounded reality of this manga. But even then, her characterization was a little weird.
Yeah, it seemed very much like whenever she showed up in the manga, I knew nothing bad was going to happen to her based on how she was drawn. And like she had like, cute girl anime armor the moment she was introduced. I felt like. I
For
like
sure.
yeah. So yeah, I didn't think that those two characters, like maybe design, didn't belong. I thought the mechanic character did, like you said, justify her existence a little bit more because she was actually like supplemental to what was happening in the plot. That said, I do think that her and the lunch lady could have stand to be redrawn.
Speaking of the cafeteria, I got to ask: can you use chopsticks?
I can, but like a tier or two above Rita. I'm not great, but I am like not going to look like an idiot when I use them at least.
I absolutely at Rita's level. I would absolutely sit there and try to spear the food with the chopstick and eat it. That was a really humanizing moment for her.
Yes. Okay. I will say that is one thing about Rita that I am glad that they made kind of anime in the story was they kind of broke the ice of her personality with how much of a goddamn American she is.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. I mean, if you're from rural Illinois, that's just kind of how it is sometimes.
Yeah, you haven't seen a chopstick, much less use one. Okay, yeah, that's it for me. Will, I believe you have an exhortation for me.
Thank you for this episode's exhortation. I very much enjoyed it, even though I had some gripes, but I am ready to exhort you for next week. Now, this is definitely something I know you already have experience with, so no huge surprises there. But for next episode, my exhortation to you is The Binding of Isaac Rebirth.
Oh boy.
Yes, I love this game. Okay, digga. My Steam stats. Binding of Isaac original playtime 147.3 hours. Binding of Isaac Rebirth playtime 208 hours. That is a huge chunk of time, and I enjoyed every single second I put into this game.
You and my girlfriend both have just like completely devoured that game.
Now, I don't want you to lie to me. Even though I know you have experience with this game, you have to spend some time playing this game before our next episode.
Oh no, I'm going to. Yeah, I will. I would never do that to you. And also, I think I own it on Switch.
Yeah, it's a great game. It's a roguelike, and it has very interesting flavor to it. You play as a crying baby, and then there's all sorts of like religious themes and like really like a nasty like under the house stuff. And it's just a really thematic and flavorful game. And I can't wait to talk about it with you.
I'm excited too. I know Tristan at least will be very excited to hear this episode.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, other than reading this absolutely brutal manga, what have you been getting into lately?
More Haikyuu, like we talked about last week. That show has kind of entered what I would consider to be the upper echelon of my anime rankings, so to speak.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't think I could like assign a 1 out of 50 number or something like that, but like I am enjoying the hell out of that show. It's very happy and uplifting, and it makes me want to play sports, even though I didn't really enjoy sports when I played them.
Yeah. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I mean, it's super popular, so I figured you'd probably enjoy it. But I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah. And aside from that, I've been just kind of dabbling. I've been playing more Monster Hunter. A few months ago, whenever I first got my PC, I had gotten an early access game that I had heard a lot of good things about, called Among Trees. It's kind of just like you're a person alone in the woods in rural, like West Virginia is what it seems like, and you're just kind of like carving out like a life there. It's sort of like a survival game. It's more pensive than that. It's not like all about putting a bunch of stress on you. You're kind of just like
Yeah.
cultivating a life, if that makes sense. And it's just it's very zen, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, one of those slice of life games. Yeah, that's definitely your jam.
Yeah, very much, and I've been enjoying it. What with the stresses of the last couple of weeks, the presidential election happening and all the other stuff we have going on, it's been nice to just kind of like hop into something that is just very calming, and you like being in. But yeah, what about you, Will? What have you been up to?
All right, so I'm just going to be straight with you. I want to take this time and not spend it now, and I want double time next episode so I can talk about Kaladesh Remastered on Magic Arena.
Okay, I'm here for that. I'm going to complain about it. I'm excited for that conversation.
Okay, I will say, actually, instead of playing a lot of video games this week, I got my school stuff that I'm working on, but a lot of my free time this weekend has actually been put into, maybe like a little project, for just Dandies things down the line.
Oh,
so,
boy.
Again, be subscribed, follow us on Twitter. We got some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline.
I'm excited for it too. I can't wait.
All right, how you feel about buttoning this one up?
Button me up, baby. I'm exposed.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Just Dandies. It means so much to us for you to be joining us here every episode. If you want, you can follow Jordan on Twitter at Action Pancake. I'm at Agro Rhetoric on Twitter, and we would love it if you would follow along with our exhortations and stay up to date on all the latest Disc Dandies excitement at Disc Dandies Pod. Join us here next episode for another spin with the Disc Dandies.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Yeah, let me get these gummy bears out of my mouth and digesting.
I did eat half a peanut butter sandwich here. It was not enjoyable or tasty, but it did fill my stomach.
Why was it not enjoyable or tasty?
Look, here's the thing, Jordan. Suffering is a virtue. It's not about being happy or doing things that are enjoyable or fun. The point is to do what you're supposed to do and to find enjoyment in the fact that regardless of the fact that like you hate everything and that you're miserable, that you have obtained virtue.
Okay, but this all implies that you don't like peanut butter.
Okay, have you ever seen How I Met Your Mother?
Don't do this to our relationship, Will. Yes, I have.
Okay, there's the episode where they're taking the road trip to Chicago, and it's that Pretender
I
song.
would walk 500 miles. Yeah.
That's the exact kind of relationship I have with peanut butter. Sometimes it's like the only thing I could ever want to eat ever. And then sometimes I'd rather stab myself in the stomach to eat another spoonful.
This is some heartbreaking shit.
It's not about being happy. It's not about having fun or anything like that. It's about being virtuous.
Okay.
I realize that makes me sound like a psychopath.
It does, yes. Hey, the good thing is at least you recognize